Yeah, wow, excited. Sitting down with Richie Cruz today. Richie is a friend of mine. We've been connected for years now. He's started a group called Porn Scar, and he has a really significant story, a journey in this whole sex trafficking conversation. He's got a lot of good stuff to share with us. Really excited to be sitting down with Richie. How are you? What's
Doing good,
happening?
man. I'm doing good, Lance. Good to see you, bro.
Right on. Thanks so much for jumping on with us. We've been in the month of January, we're having like this wide conversation around trafficking. And we try to hit the gamut, like talk to different people in different spaces. We just did an interview with a local medical professional here in town that's in the middle of doing protocols for discovering victims in hospitals. And so very much the professional landscape. Talked to a survivor a couple weeks ago, had the privilege of interviewing Benji from Exodus Cry, and now really, really stoked for this conversation. Your story, your journey, you've just got some stuff to say, and we'll just start and lead with the straight up smack in your face. Richie is a former buyer of sex. His porn addiction led him to cross the line into purchasing sex. And that's what we want to get into today. And we want to talk all around that issue. I mean, without demand, there would not be this supply of vulnerable individuals. So a lot to get after here. It's still shocking to me that this conversation doesn't happen in like a central context in terms of unpacking trafficking. I mean, this really is, if you want to talk about solution, like, let's deal with this. Let's actually stop the purchase of sex and it'll go away. So let's back up, talk about your journey, like some of what led to that big decision, maybe, whatever you'd want to share.
Yeah,
But again,
Lance, you bet,
thanks for
man.
being with us, Richie.
Yeah, of course. So I've shared this story many times at conferences, gatherings, men's groups, purity groups, accountability groups, recovery groups, and every single time it is engaging, it's triggering, because I really want to be as honest as I can and just kind of rip the mask off of this whole thing. Pornography addiction, sex trafficking, it's pretty rampant, not just outside of the four walls of the church, but in the pews and in the pulpit. And when we start talking about this, that's when there's light that shed on these things. And then there's the beginning of freedom and the beginning of wholeness that I really long for. If we want to see our cities transformed, man, in my opinion, I feel that the church really has to start getting healed up, freed up, and we need to start talking about it. So I share my journey with that premise is I'm going to rip off the mask. I'm going to be very explicit. And a lot of this is pretty triggering. So I grew up in the church. I'm a pastor's kid. My uncle was a pastor. Church was my life. And, I saw the good, bad, and ugly. I saw all of it, the politics behind it and everything. And as a kid, I didn't really want to grow up and be a pastor. I was like, I want to do something outside of the four walls of the church, So I started pursuing my own career, high school, college, wanted to become a nurse, go in the medical field. And this was around 2000, 2005. So internet age is brand new, right? Hold on, I think we're having a...
There we go.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. There we go.
There was a picture, but now we see you. That's better.
Okay, cool. Okay, right on. So, but like I said, before the internet age, all we had, and we meaning guys, was just, the adult store across town, or, the liquor store in another city or whatever, shady areas. We had to go and find pornography. Now pornography is looking for us, and we have to, put barriers to block, the rampant, pursuit of pornography industry. So,
what a crazy shift right there. I mean, that's crazy.
It's a culture shift.
You used to have to find it, and now it's literally seeking us out, men.
It is.
Or sex. Yeah.
It is. It is. I mean, I was first exposed to porn at 6 years old in kindergarten. And I remember, I didn't have language for it, obviously, but I remember just something coming on me. And Neurologically, I didn't have the language for it either, but something was awoken in me within my neuro connections and all the stuff that was not supposed to be happening for quite a while. But that awoken that addiction, that desire to seek out more of those feelings. And so I did throughout the, my elementary and high school years. As long as I could get access to, paper porn, I felt normal again. I felt, oh, okay, good. I'm feeding this. I'm being satiated. Being a Christian, I had to hide it even more. Being a pastor's kid, it's like, no, that's the pastor's kid. So I learned to create a double life and a Jekyll and Hyde persona. And I got really good at it. And it was scary because I was aware of what I was doing. I going to, church conferences and gatherings and seeing people come to the altar or, confessing sins or whatever. And I'm here living this double life, and I justified it. I made every excuse up. The shame was overwhelming. Of course, I can't tell anybody this. And, so because that was in the dark, it allowed it to fester and really control how I respond and act towards the opposite sex, towards myself, towards sex in general. It became a wrong version of what I was supposed to experience apart from that. So I'm graduating, I'm going to college.
Sorry to interrupt, but just like, I just want to interject in there. Can you recognize hindsight 2020? You're an adult now. Can you recognize what, obviously you had that first encounter, very young boy, and is the persistence of that porn habit as simple as, well, I just wanted to see more images, or what other things were at play, like in your social dynamics? Were there like things that you were dealing with at an emotional level and you couldn't have probably described it then, that you were like reacting to, and porn was in some way as a source for you? Obviously, porn was a source for you. What do you think it was sourcing in you during your kind of coming of age years? Because it sounds like you're saying from 6 through high school. So that's like a pretty broad range of time.
Yeah, definitely. Porn was an escape. Porn served as a world where I was in control. It was a world that where I was worshipped. I was the master. And so I was the one who had it all because I was in control. Right. And so, I was,
so you're feeding a fantasy.
Yeah.
And it's like building up your, an element of your ego. It's obviously a false ego, but so you're like feeling fulfilled in that lust exchange, and you're like, I'm the man. That's what you're saying.
Definitely. Wow. It fed the ego, because in porn, I get to control, I call the shots, right? There's genres in porn. I get to pick what I want, right? It really is about the me, and then with, raging hormones, it's just the perfect recipe for, dysfunction,
So you were saying it's affecting every area of your life, all your relationships, and then I cut you off.
Yeah. So this was in the late 1990s, and the internet was just coming on, and we had access to porn, that was free, so that was a whole new world for me. Whereas I used to go to other places to go find it, now it's finding me. I'm going to college on my computer, and a random pop-up, and I'm like, what's this? And boom, downward spiral into that life again. And it really fed those neuro pathways that I formed throughout my formative years. Those highways were reactivated again. And I started saving money to buy hundreds of dollars worth of porn in my college years, because now I had my own source of income, and now porn was anonymous, it was accessible, right? And it was affordable, so that was the cocktail that normalized pornography for me. And over the years, I became desensitized. And because of that desensitization, what I considered perverted back then became the norm, right? And so it grew and grew from more gross and more dehumanizing content, because the previous porn wasn't doing it for me anymore. Right. So I had to get more severe, I had to get more extreme, more hardcore in the content that I was consuming. And I remember thinking to myself when I first started accessing online porn, you go down this menu and you're like, oh, I'm not going to do that genre. Oh, that's too much. Oh my gosh, why would anybody have that genre? And over the years, I found myself looking at those that I found disgusting and finding pleasure, quote unquote, pleasure in that, because I was normalizing. I became desensitized by just overexposure to that content. It really changed the way my brain was functioning. And I felt it. But like I said, I knew how to hide it, right? I knew how to hide it. And that's the scary thing.
And it wasn't something that you could be open about. Like there's clearly was shame. It's clearly something you were hiding. So the idea of like, oh, it's okay, wasn't really operating in you. You weren't like, this is okay.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so, I mean, we're having this conversation and this is new, right? I mean, this is becoming the new normal now. Thank goodness that we're having this conversation nationally, internationally, right? Yeah. But back in the early 2000s, this was not a thing. You know, there was a couple of ministries that were geared towards making this more public, this conversation. But if you made that public, there was this, scarlet letter kind of vibe that you would get, like, oh, this person, they're a porn addict. And, I don't want to be labeled a porn addict, and so, the Promise Keepers at the time, they created a movement where for a time there was, let's confess our addiction to pornography. And there was some momentum, but there was no traction because there was no ongoing intentional discipleship in talking about this and rewiring the brain, where there was no neuroscience the way we have it now. There was this conversation, this language wasn't there, so I kept it in the dark because I didn't want to be labeled an addict. I didn't want to be labeled, oh, this pervert, right? Or whatever the name that would have been put on me. You're a pastor's kid? Oh, Richie, you? What? And so that shame factor was, a huge contributor to keeping me in the dark. It was still a choice, but that was a huge force to keep me in the dark. I don't want to be labeled.
Totally. Do you have any thoughts on why that pull is so strong now? I think it's a pull throughout all generations, but I do think there's something unique happening right now with the advent of technology and whatnot.
Definitely.
Any thoughts there? Any thoughts on why men, and I realize it's not just a male issue. I know that females also deal with porn habits, porn addiction. But I'd love your insights or thoughts on that. Why people dip into that lake, why they're pulling from that source,
Yeah, I think we didn't have language for it in the late 90s and the early 2000s, but it would be called cancel culture. If you were to be exposed because of this scandal, oh, this person, don't purchase their stuff, don't go to any of their conferences, we're going to cancel this person. They have no say anymore. They lost all credibility. So having that, let's say you're a person of authority, person of influence, whether you're in the church, whether you're a business owner, whether you're in education, whatever field that you're in, you're caught with a scandal, you lose all credibility, right? And so hypothetically, I built this career, I built this life, this public persona, and once my private persona is exposed, my public persona loses all credibility, and I become this person who is just labeled as this addict or this pervert, right? And so that fear is very real. Sure. I will lose my spouse, I'll lose my children. People are going to look at me in a different way, and I just can't afford that. So people are stuck. Yeah. People choose to, but with the onset of the internet, there's this, disinhibition effect. You can remain anonymous, right? Yeah. And so it gives you this sense of I get to do more stuff in the dark because no one's going to find out who I am. Wow. And so that has spilled over now into our internet age, into our social media age, right? where people are ghosting, where people find ways to navigate and stay anonymous, right? Back in the early, 2000s, late 90s, we didn't have any of these, resources, any of these, ways to keep our, secret lives, thriving. Now it's the perfect recipe to have a private, personal life that no one knows about, which is one of the reasons why I'm so excited. This, Ghislaine Maxwell and this whole thing is happening right now because these people that are in power, that are in platforms of influence, they've lived a double life also, right? I mean, we can see that happening regardless of, where you are in your career or how famous you are. Those principles are still working, those duplicitous principles, of hiding it and refusing to go into the light and saying, I have a struggle. I am addicted to this. This is what I'm using my resources on, right? I have another persona. And so this is, we're thrusted into this conversation, whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
And because it's overwhelming culture. It's a pornified culture now.
Yeah. So this ecosystem you're living in leads you to where? What ultimately ends up happening?
Yeah. So if you're consuming pornography on a regular basis, I'm going to use the language we have now to describe what's happening neuropathically. Our neural pathways are, geared now to get more of that dopamine, more of that serotonin, more of that neurochemical cocktail, the reward and pleasure. So when you have unlimited access to that kind of content, your brain is saying, I need more. I need to experience this now offline. I need to experience what you're consuming digitally. I need to experience in the real world. So that's when it gets even more scary, because most people, most healthy people, most healthy women will not consent to the stuff that happens in pornography. You have to pay for it. You have to go out and look for it and use your own resources to consume this. And so that's where it led me. This was around 2005. Craigslist at the time still had their personals section. And I remember I was doing homework for my nursing program that I was in at the time. And I'm like, I'm by myself. I'm gonna go on Craigslist. And sure enough, I go and there's this ad and I click on it and all the neurochemical cocktail just gets activated. And all the images from 6 years old on was just put into my face, just flashes of memories, flashes of porn, flashes of secret, adventures that I had, on porn. That whole world, that private world was just reactivated, like heroin, like cocaine. Those areas of the brain was overwhelming me. So I had to go. I remember telling myself, I'm going to create this story. I'm going to tell my wife, this is what I'm going to be doing. But in reality, I'm going to be pursuing sex. I'm going to be doing this. And I was aware of that the whole time. I was aware of how unhealthy that was. And that kind of an addiction, neuropathically, your prefrontal cortex is hijacked by all of this neuro cocktail. I couldn't stop myself even if I wanted to, because it was the force of me wanting to fulfill what I saw in the digital world was so strong that I had to get that high. So that was the shift for me from going online to offline.
Okay.
I was no longer content with digital images. I had to experience it in the real world, in real time.
Sure. So you set up a meetup. You paid for sex. What's the kicker there? Is there like a fulfillment? Is there like, wow, my fantasy is fulfilled? Is there, what's the result?
Yeah. So, like I said, I get very explicit and very graphic. So this is a little triggering, but growing up in the church, I still had that, this is right, this is wrong conscience, right? I still had like this awareness of what I'm doing is not only immoral, but this is probably illegal. Like, I'm paying for sex. Like, what am I doing here? That awareness was there, even in the act, even while I was in the bedroom. That awareness of what I'm doing is not just immoral, it is illegal. What I'm doing here, this is so wrong. And I remember that night, I talked to the person and I said, why do you do this? And the person said, because it's easy money. And my mom was the one who put the ad for me. And when she said that, I was blown away. I was like, this is crazy. I said it to myself, like, oh my God, this is deeper than just, I just saw an ad.
Yeah.
There's a whole nother world that I was unaware of.
Yeah.
Where there was supply. There was people selling other people for the reason of sex. And that there was a whole other world of that. That was scary at the time.
Do you think your eyes were opening to the
oh yeah.
Like,
yeah.
porn leads to, and this ultimately fuels the sex trade. Do you think you were starting to like wake up?
Oh, definitely. Because after that, then I realized, because I remember I went to Starbucks and I called a friend of mine and I told him what I did. I'm crying and as I'm crying and confessing this stuff, I'm remembering the path that led me to that craziness. And I remember that first image and when I was 6 years old. I mean, it was like that vivid in my imagination. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, because I refused to talk about it, because I refused to share my story of the struggle. It led to this. It led to this. Oh my gosh, I am alone. I am alone. That was a very sobering moment for me. It was very scary because I knew that now I had to not be alone anymore. Because being alone led to that. So confessing this to a trusted friend was literally the first step in a world of light, in a world that said, I will not be alone anymore. Even though those desires was still there neurologically, they were still, I was still hijacked. I was still an addict, right? But now that my foot was now in a world of light, I realized, looking back, wow, I can't believe how lonely I was. I can't believe it.
That word isn't used enough. Like, you're an addict. I think too often, like, maybe because of the cultural temperature in terms of sexuality, a real hypersexualized culture that we live in, we don't talk about, like, we'll talk about drug addiction, whatever, power addiction, but it's like, you were a sex addict. And
Definitely.
and there's something actually empowering. Like, when you say that, there is an element of like, oh, okay, like I can get better and I need healing, versus
that was it.
Versus what keeps you in the dark and all that shame, and you're alone and you can't tell anybody. So, I mean, that's incredible that you called your friend.
True. In that phone call, I remember he asked me, are you going to tell your wife? And I was confronted again, with two choices: stay alone, or let's start this journey of healing. And so I told my friend on the phone, I'm going to tell my wife. And he said, good job. Because he had come from multiple affairs himself. He on the other side, right? This person was a father, he was a mentor. He said, Richie, I've been there, right? And he didn't tell me what to do. Because growing up in the church, I heard the rules, and I was done, right? And so he gave me an option. I have a choice. I don't have to tell my wife. I can live in the secret again, even though I confessed it. I knew that me saying yes to the light was the key to get healing, to pursue the wholeness that I knew I needed, and to not be alone anymore. because porn, what I tell a lot of people, porn is the activity of the lonely.
Wow, that's
So, and people, a lot of the men that I've talked with, when I say, "Are you an addict?" When I first started mentoring men, they would say no. And so I learned to change the language. And so instead of saying, "Are you an addict?" I would just go down these characteristics. Do you do this? Do you do this? And they would say, "Yep." Do you participate in this activity online? Yep. How often do you do this? I do this about, twice a day. Okay. And then I turn on not to shame them. I'm like, bro, you're an addict. And
wow.
I've been there. Like, we justify it so much because we are alone. There's no one to tell us the blind spots. There's no one to tell us because we've closed them off.
Yeah.
We've closed them off.
Yeah.
Right. So the activity of the lonely is a dangerous road because you will go offline. It's just a matter of time. I don't care if you have the willpower to say, "No, I won't do that." You're fooling yourself. You will go offline. And the pornographers and the sex traffickers, they know this. They know this.
Yeah, so that's like a symbiotic relationship, trafficking, porn, they're feeding each other. And those in the industry understand that. They know it. And they're ultimately, they're preying on that appetite or that vulnerability, because it really is a vulnerability in individuals, isn't it? Like to
It is.
look at porn, you're actually responding to a vulnerability within yourself. You're being, well, there's an influence. You're not just doing it because you want to do it. It's like there's something else going on. So
Oh, yeah.
so let's talk about your healing journey. So it sounds like it started with that phone call to a friend.
Yeah,
Like I
it
want
did.
to, I mean, that had to be a pretty tough conversation. Like
Oh, it
talking
was.
with your wife. I mean, talking with your
It,
wife.
it was. It was. Obviously, after I told my wife she was brokenhearted,
Yeah.
she said, "I'm not going to leave you, but
Wow.
you do need some help."
Wow.
And she
That's
came
a
from
courageous lady
a
right
lot of
there.
healing. Oh my gosh,
That's a
yes.
strong woman.
Oh my goodness. I mean, she was obviously angry, and you could tell the walls were up. I remember sleeping on the floor in my kid's room, crying like, I just ruined it. Like, what? I am a loser. I am a loser,
Hmm.
and I need help. And she's not going to leave me, but I need help. So we ended up moving from Central California. We moved back up to Redding, California,
Okay.
and we went to our church there where we have our friends, where my mentor was at, and he plugged me in. He said, "Richie, you're going to need some help. People to speak into your life."
Hmm.
And I was hungry for resources.
Yeah.
2005, there wasn't that many resources online, but I found some. Someone gave me Covenant Eyes, and they had a blog and a podcast. And I remember I had my Chrome iPod. I mean, that's how old that is, man. And I downloaded every single episode of the Covenant Eyes podcast,
Okay.
and they talked about the neuroscience, that how porn hijacks the brain, the male brain. They talked about women that have come out of the porn industry and some of the trauma and the horrific events that led them to that, and that they experienced while they're making this content. And it showed another world that I wasn't privy to. The ugly side, quote unquote. All of it's ugly, but the ugly side, the behind the scenes of pornography. And it started to match up. It started to look like this is just sex trafficking. And
Yeah.
I'm viewing it. I'm viewing sex trafficking. And so it started giving me this anger that I was duped. Like, I felt like they knew what they were doing. They were feeding me this stuff, and they're exploiting the actors and the actresses, and they're exploiting my wounds. They're exploiting my father wounds, my mother wounds. They're exploiting my isolation that I've lived for 20 plus years or whatever. This is a machine of exploitation, and
Wow.
they know what they're doing. And so the more I started talking with other fathers and other mentors, the more freedom, the more insights into my own unique healing, because every healing is unique.
Mm.
Everyone has their own unique background, their family dynamics, wherever you've grown, in California or wherever, there's a unique, history that we have. So I'm sharing my story, sharing my relationship with my parents, with my siblings, growing up in school, things that weren't related to porn. I end up finding, wow, all of this is related to porn, because porn is sex, or the ideal, it's showing us a wrong version of sex, but it's intimacy. And I craved intimacy. I did not know how to access intimacy in a healthy way, because I was taught, I was mentored, discipled by pornography on what intimacy is. And it was just an act. It was just what I want, what I get, right? It wasn't this mutual vulnerability, mutual respect, mutual give and take with my spouse. It wasn't a covenant. It wasn't a transparency, this trust thing, right? So all of these mindsets I had to unlearn. I had to peel back so many layers of mindsets that I accumulated through years of pornography consumption. And it was a shameful path. I remember going to men's groups and saying, I looked at this type of porn. It's not just I looked at porn. And so, no, it's like, what kind of porn did you look at? Oh, well, I looked at this kind of porn and I found pleasure in it. And this shame was overwhelming. And that's where they said, okay, we need to remove the shame now. Let's remove the shame. You are in a safe place, Richie. So I reached out to mentors, to fathers, and listened to podcasts. I listened to it every single day for 8 hours a day, because I worked at a pool cleaning company up in Northern California, and that's all I had. And so I ingested it, the same episodes over and over and over for literally a year. And it became a part of me, and learning how to have conversations, learning how to see the opposite sex in a healthy way, because I had to unlearn what I've learned through pornography. And it was a daunting path, because my wife was with me the whole time. We would have arguments like, how could you do this? Why?
Sure.
And I remember one of my mentors was like, Richie, she has every right to be mad. And guess what, Richie? You can't defend yourself. Allow her to vent. Allow her to speak her truth from her perspective, from what you allowed in the marriage. Allow it. And I did. And
well, I'm
there
sure
were some late nights.
I'm sure she was grieving and like just really dealing with anger. And so back to like, you're in this deep dive of learning about, the things that made you vulnerable. You're also discovering, you're getting behind the veil of what porn really is. And is that for you, that understanding, I think it's mutual. You understand really what's behind the curtain and how they operate, but then you also get in touch with your leanings and your vulnerabilities. Is that the path to healing? Like, is that the process? Because I'm after a couple things here. It's like, how many people with the porn habit even understand that they're contributing to the problem of sex trafficking? My assumption is like very limited amount.
Very little.
Okay.
Very little. There's this lie that what we're viewing is adults that consented to this.
And it's like real. It's some kind of real. It's not a fantasy. It's not produced or made up or
Yes. And so there's the lie that reels us in. Oh, this pornography is created by consenting adults. So there is, nothing illegal going on. They're getting paid. I mean, they're living the glam life, right? Like, they're happy. I'm happy. How is this harmful? How is this contributing to, the end of my marriage? My wife doesn't even have to know. In fact, it's keeping me from, committing adultery, and we make up all of these lies, right? And we don't know. I remember my wife and we read a book by the late Shelley Lubin, who came out of the industry. And this was the shift in our conversation for my wife and I.
Okay.
And
do you remember the name of the book?
Oh my gosh.
But you said it was written by Shelley.
Written by Shelley Lubin. She passed away a couple of years ago. She came out of the porn industry,
Okay.
and she ended up becoming a friend of mine. And but we read her book together out loud in our living room, and it was extremely explicit because Shelley Lubin was talking about some of the stuff that was behind the scenes of these pornographers getting drugs, giving the drugs to the actresses so they're high, right? And they're coercing them, they're manipulating them.
Wow.
There's so many things that I was not aware of
Mhm.
that was happening to the porn performers. And there was a lot of blackmailing. There was so many things that was, I mean, scary when you read about it. There's this whole criminal operation happening
Yeah.
where you don't even know, you don't see that. And
That's
in
what I
her
was
book,
gonna
Shelley,
say. I love that you use that word. It's a criminal enterprise like that.
it really is.
Yeah.
It goes deep. It goes deep. And Shelley Lubin is ripping the mask off, saying, yes, I've talked to this and this person, and this is what they gave us. This is what they gave us. This is what they threatened us with. This is, we performed sometimes hours while we were high. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like this is crazy. Oh my gosh. There was so much just trauma, so much trauma. And I remember just feeling sick to my stomach. I just, my wife's there, we're reading this out loud together, and we're like, porn is fueling sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is giving the demand. I mean, the supply to what we're demanding. Like, that's where we saw the connection. We're like, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is around 2009, 2010.
Okay.
And we were like, okay, one of the best ways to start this conversation is to start talking about it.
Yeah.
And so that's when we started Porn Scar. There's a story behind every scar. That's the whole idea behind that. And it's sharing your story. It's sharing your story. Another pastor in Reading came to me and said, Richie, I want to interview you for your story. And I said, okay, I will. And so I did. And he recorded it, like a quick 3-minute video on a Sunday morning. Heather didn't show up. She stayed home. And I'm there nervous, like, oh my gosh, I lived 20 years of saying no, I'm not going to share my story, to one choice of saying, yes, I'm going to share my story. And here we go. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm so nervous. Are they going to label me a pervert, an addict? I don't care at this point anymore, because I know what saying no does. I'm going to say yes now. And so we're watching the video, 3 minutes is over. You can feel, I mean, it's palatable. It's the heaviness, the oppression, like, this is crazy. Sex trafficking, pornography in church, Sunday gathering. What's going on? The service was over. I went to go pick up my kids at the childcare during the service. And men and women approached me and said, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing your story. My marriage ended because my spouse was addicted to pornography. Another person came, thank you. I'm addicted to pornography. Wow. Another person came, and this was just on the way from the main sanctuary to go pick up my kids in Sunday school.
Yeah.
and I was like, oh my gosh. Like, there wasn't, rocks that people were stoning me. I wasn't in the court of public, people were saying, Richie, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for giving me the courage to go second. Thank you, Richie. And that's when I started seeing the connections. Okay, my journey may last a lifetime, and I'm okay with that now. But in that journey, me sharing the story of how I went from A to B to C and going offline, and how it infected my marriage, how it infected the way I viewed the women, the opposite sex, sexuality in general, just everything. Wow, oh my gosh, how it's connected to sex trafficking and the whole criminal world that's involved in that. Oh my gosh, I got to start sharing my story. I got to start saying to other guys, hey, what we are participating in is fueling this. It's fueling this. The reason why it's so hard to get away from this is because there's new content, because we're asking, we're demanding this content. That's why there's so much, because we keep demanding it. And the reason why we keep demanding it It's because you're still in the dark. You're still alone.
Mm.
Let's stop being alone, right? And so there was a lot of movements that has been happening, both outside of the church and inside of the church. Me stepping back, looking now, I mean, we're in a post-purity culture now, right? Where we're not looking like, let's look, let's pure lives, the purity rings, like performance, rules, right? It's not about that anymore. That doesn't work, right? We're now discovering, okay, there's language that describes what's happening neurologically in our brains. The neurochemical cocktail that happens with pleasure, all that stuff, consequences. We have language for that now. We have language for what does it mean to start sharing your story, vulnerability, transparency. We have language for this now. So I'm looking back over the years and I'm seeing, wow, this Goliath of sex trafficking and pornography, yes, it's gonna come down now, because now we have the language that is our rock, right? This language of transparency and community and vulnerability and the neural pathways. We have language of how our brain is plastic and can be changed now. We have language on how sex trafficking is fueled by pornography. We're having conversations even now in the news with Jeffrey Epstein and all this stuff now. It's now in the public eye again. This public, we're having this, right? Pornhub is now in court, right? Because now it's been, exposed that yes, the women, the people that are involved, yes, they are being trafficked. Yeah. Yes, there is force, fraud, and coercion that is happening behind the scenes that I said, this is what I wanted. And now that men and women, one of the fastest demographic of porn consumers, they're now sharing their stories of, yes, I am struggling. I need wholeness. I want wholeness. Mental health, yeah, that's part of it. And it's an exciting time to be alive because it's happening now.
I love it. Yeah. Wow. What a crazy moment we're living in. And your story, like so central. Your story is so central to solution, healing, change. I love it. I love the hope that you're carrying. I think you're so right. I think the game is changing. Like I just see like the brick wall that was built. It's like just being dismantled. Stuff's falling. People's eyes are opening. They're waking up. Anything you would say, picture a young man hasn't dabbled with porn yet. Anything you would say to that individual as they may be getting bombarded or being sought out by porn, as you said earlier?
Yeah. So I have 5 kids. Mm-hmm. I have 4 boys, right? And our youngest is a daughter. And we have 3 teenagers, right? And they all have smart devices, and I remember the first conversation we had with our oldest. This was years ago. And he came to my wife and I, and with tears in his eyes, he said, Dad, Mom, I looked at something I shouldn't have looked at. Mm. And our hearts, before he said that, our hearts was like, oh no, what is he going to say? Oh no, right? At this time, I was already speaking at conferences, at men's groups, stuff like that. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, oh no, it's going to be porn. I just know it. And then the other side was like, you teach on this and you educate the public, and your own son is dealing with this stuff. And, it's all wrong. This whole, ordeal was going on internally. And yeah. He shared, Dad, this is what I did. And we hugged him. We embraced, we cried together. There wasn't a shame factor. I opened up and said, son, I know the struggle. I know how tough it can be in those areas of temptation. And guess what? There are some times when I haven't been strong myself, but now I have a world where I am no longer alone. That was the key right there. When I said I was no longer alone. Yeah. And so that was with my own son. And so I've used that in other conversations with men, young men as well, who were, now becoming their own person. They have access to smart devices and the internet stuff and all the free garbage that's out there, and bombarded with the industry trying to, hook them in. And they've come to me, Richie, I don't want to look at this stuff, but it's really tough. What can I do? And I said, you're doing it, bro. You're doing it. You're talking about it. You're talking about it. And they would just start crying. They would just start crying. And we're not gonna put a purity ring on them. We're not gonna, put more rules on them. We're not gonna say, we're saying, hey, you're not alone.
Yeah.
You're not alone. Because porn is the activity of the lonely.
Wow.
And I would say, bro, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense, but I don't know how it works. But this is the strongest weapon in our arsenal, is being people of community, being people of transparency, of vulnerability, and saying, hey, yes, we can fight together because of what happened when we were alone. We can now fight together. So what I would tell that young person is, you're not alone.
Nice.
And your door to not be alone is to start sharing your story.
Yeah.
Start sharing your story however you feel comfortable with. Whether it's, I've looked at this. Dates aren't important right now. The type of porn isn't important right now. We may get to that conversation, but right now it's saying this, I'm hurting.
Yeah.
It's saying this, I feel alone. It's saying this, I have pain somewhere and I don't have language for it. Can you help me?
Yeah.
That's the biggest weapon that we have, the strongest weapon that we have.
It's beautiful. It's simple too. I mean, it's extremely profound and deeply powerful, but it's simple. Do you think something like this, I mean, we've had a dream. It's like, I wish something like this was available to offenders, like people that have actually been caught buying. I would love for us to point more resources towards sex buyers, because I think if they were to encounter someone like yourself and the story that you're sharing, not everybody, but I would think a large majority would awaken to like, wow, I've got some needs and I'm not meeting them in a healthy way. And I'm contributing to a really big problem.
Yeah.
Beyond me and my family, I'm like contributing to somebody that's in sex for sale landscape, being trafficked, whatever. I don't know. I carry that hope. Probably that's because I'm a Jesus follower, and
yeah,
I just think people can be redeemed. I do think people need to be healed. Do you have any insight or any maybe even encountered cities that have done something like this with offenders? Like, I mean, it's actually integrated with like the justice system.
Yeah. So I know someone who actually went to a pastor and confessed, and they said, I actually went offline and I interacted with someone who was underage, and that person is still in jail right now. So there are consequences that, where the law enforcement comes in. So I don't want to minimize that at all. In fact, that's a common thing, unfortunately, especially when there's child pornography, right? So I would recommend, though, I'll go back to your answer to the question, but I would recommend if you're struggling with that, any of you viewers or listeners, there's still freedom on the other side. There's still wholeness on the other side. You don't want to stay alone in that world. But I remember I spoke at a conference in Oregon, and I shared my story, and we had a couple of fathers in that house, in that church, that were so fed up with these younger generations being alone and struggling alone, that gathering, the men on their own stood up. I mean, they interrupted me speaking. I mean, it was a good interruption. They said, I'm going to mentor the men in my church. Wow. And I was like, oh my God. And the other person stood up and said, I will too. I will dedicate my summer to dedicate any of you guys. If you're feeling alone, my Saturdays are yours.
Wow.
And it just influenced so many other fathers in this house. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening here? And it was amazing. So as far as offenders, I haven't seen any, but that doesn't mean that there are people that are saying, you know what, I can create a program. I can stand up. I want to pursue law now. I want to pursue something that will help influence change in this fight. And I want to pursue, I want to organize my community to offer resources for offenders, whether it's faith-based or not.
Totally.
So if you're viewing this or listening to this, maybe that program hasn't been made yet because you have to do it.
Yeah, that's a good word. I like that. Yeah, I know that that stuff exists in certain communities. But yeah, I think this is such a big piece of the equation is, addicts, buyers, having transformational experiences. I know we have things like maybe anger management classes for those that are like participating in domestic violence.
There are sex addiction recovery groups.
Yeah, there you go. Sex addiction recovery groups. And it sounds like what Porn Scar has been is really that, though. And that's really profound, really powerful. I'm so glad you guys are doing what you're doing.
I mean, a whole point is to share our story. There's a story behind every scar. In 2012, we were talking about this before the Zoom. Benji Nolo of Exodus Cry, he approached us. We were in Reading, and he was making a film on sex buyers, and he was traveling the United States looking for men specifically who went offline and purchased sex, and that were willing to share their story very explicitly. And a mutual friend of ours in Reading was like, "Hey, Richie, you want to share?" And I'm like, let's do it. So I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I just knew that there was this documentary, and he had produced Nefarious, Merchant of Souls, another documentary on sex trafficking. And so I kind of figured it was going to be that kind of, content. But at the time, I still didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I shared my story, and it was about an hour and a half of just pouring my story and my soul out. And Benji was like, "Richie, can we interview your wife? This is so profound. Can we interview her?" So he did. And this was in 2012. Right. And the film Raised on Porn was just released last year. So this is pretty much a 10-year process. And, we've been waiting, we would text Benji, like, "How's it going? How's the editing? How's all this stuff?" And he would say, "There's just so much content. Like I'm traveling in the States and there's so much, there's so much." And that broke my heart.
That's tragic.
Because there was a lot of men, and there's women too, but right now I'm talking to the men right now. There's a lot of men that are still afraid to come into the light and to not be alone anymore, because it's going to ruin, quote unquote, their reputation, their status, right? They're going to be canceled, right? It's just all of these, these lies or half truths, that are bombarding them and keeping them in the dark, and they released the film last year, and there's over 1 million views. There's other stories in the film, and it's a short film, but it's sharing our story. If you look at it, they give you, statistics, they give you facts on neuroscience and the plasticity of the brain. We need that. We need to arm ourselves and educate ourselves with those facts, but nothing beats the story. Nothing beats the personal, unique, personified story. And that's the key. Porn dehumanizes people. Sharing our story humanizes people. That is what we need. That is what is so powerful, because we're humanizing the story again. So I would highly recommend watching that film. I have some takeaways that I had. One of them was, get involved in influencing legislation. Exodus Cry, they have a lot of links that, that will influence legislation. But again, the top two is there's a supply and demand. There's the supply and demand. I mean, the wives probably would say, "Just stop looking at it. Just stop looking at it." Right. And there is some truth to that. Right. Radical freedom requires radical inconvenience. Right. Jesus said, if you want freedom, if your eyes cause you to sin, pluck it out. If your hands cause you to sin, cut it off. Radical inconvenience produces radical freedom. Right. So get rid of the smartphone. Right. You got to get radically inconvenienced if you want that freedom, if you want that wholeness. And sometimes it's, yes, I'm going to get uncomfortable. I'm going to share my story. Yes. So go ahead.
Yep, I'm listening. Keep going.
Oh, yes. Yeah, man. So my recommendation to our viewers and to our listeners is, yes, share your story. That is so key. Don't minimize your story as horrific or quote unquote not horrific. Oh, I just looked at porn once or twice. No, 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 no. That's a story. Someone needs to hear that, because there are young men and women that are curious, that they have the hormones going on, and porn is seeking to educate, quote unquote, educate this generation. So
good.
when men and women are saying, you know what, this is my story, this is my journey, this is my struggle, I'm not alone, and you don't have to be alone. Guess what? It starts to humanize this process. And we're designed for community. We're designed for family. So
I love it,
yeah,
man. You're sharing such rich truth and so much insight. I think there's a lot of keys for people that may be in a place of struggling, battling. Where would people find more on Pornscar, or if they wanted to follow you? Is there a way
yeah. So
to? Yeah.
we do have an Instagram, Porn Scar.
Yep.
Just look up Porn Scar. We
Great.
have lots of stories from individuals that are brave, sharing their journey, sharing their struggle, right? Different perspectives, different worldviews and backgrounds on how they're pursuing wholeness and healing.
Great.
And it's just encouragement to, go second, go again, and speak up.
It's good, man. And then Richie also mentioned that his story is featured in the latest film from Exodus Cry, Raised on Porn. You guys can find that over on their YouTube channel, which is Magic Lantern Pictures
Yes.
on YouTube. So that's a great resource. And there's links that those guys are providing on their website if you want to participate in needed legislative reform in this space. Again, it's very easy in our culture to get under the influence of porn, to start walking that road. And so I think what Exodus Cry is up to there, they're trying to change the game and create age verification dynamics, shift laws. So
yes.
it's easy. And I love the statement you made earlier. It's like we used to have to pursue porn if we're of an older generation, and now it's like porn is literally chasing us down.
Yes.
What a thought. So much
you're
insight,
books,
man. You got so much insight, so much wisdom. I really appreciate the time, Richie. And again, if you guys want to follow Richie, just on Instagram, Pornscar. And if you want to see his story, go to that Magic Lantern Pictures YouTube channel, because they're in that film, Raised on Porn. It's amazing.
Yes.
Richie, I'm going to land this thing. We've been talking for about an hour now. So ready to push stop. But man, I so appreciate your time. There's so much life on this conversation. I think it's so vital for this generation to have this insight and not, as you've said over and over again, like not stay in the dark and not stay alone. Like there is a way to get free. And I feel like you're passing out huge keys, like real bona fide keys. So thanks for being willing. And
bro, I appreciate that. For those who've never struggled in it and still want to get equipped, we need you guys. We need you guys too. Real quick, there's these two books that I would highly recommend.
Nice.
This one is The Johns, Sex for Sale, and The Men Who Buy It. This book would be like the Bible if you want to find out how porn and sex trafficking are connected. And then this book here, Pornography, Driving the Demand in International Sex Trafficking. Those two books are incredibly insightful with not just facts and stories, but just so much tools on how to combat this on every sphere of influence. So
thank you for sharing that. Can you also share the authors of those books?
Yes.
Who wrote them?
For the Johns, it's Victor Maleric. I don't know if you can see that or not.
That's fine. Yeah, that's
and
great.
Then for this book here, it's by Captive Daughters Media. It's a collaborative. So there's many authors in this book here. Nice. But I highly recommend them. Get informed to, stay informed to inform other people. So
yeah, excellent resources too. Thanks for making
right on, Lance.
All right. Well, man, I appreciate you. Thank you for what you've done.
All right, Lance. Talk to you soon, bro.
Okay. With that, I'm going to say goodbye. Peace.
Later.